everybody. It's good to see you. I have something really exciting to announce. Joe, Victoria, can you stand up back in the AV booth? Joe and Victoria are getting married on Saturday. Yeah. So, you can go ahead and sit back down because I know you probably want to, but Joe has been working the lights since before we even moved into this building. He became an expert in lighting, and he has helped us so much for years and years. And Victoria has worked the slides to make all of this stuff happen for years and years, and they sat there next to each other and fell in love. How about that? And we get to be a part of it. So the wedding is on Saturday. I'm so excited for you guys, and I can't wait to do your wedding and all that. And so thanks for letting us be a part of your story. Yeah? Cool. All right. They moved to Florida because Joe got a job at Disney. So that's how big of a deal he is. He's really, really talented, and we're going to be sad to see them go. But we love you guys and are thankful for all the time that you put in here. Let's talk about, that's me. It's like never in. That's too much of me. That's a lot of me. I don't know what to do about that. But anyway, let's talk about downpour. I just have to not look at it. Downpour is happening starting in this fall. This is different than anything else we've ever done. We're talking about our desperation for God. Let me give you this example. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. But imagine that you're in a desert. You've been in this desert for several hours. You've ran out of water. You're not, crying out for a cheeseburger. You're not crying out for a candy bar. What are you crying out for in that moment? Water, right? You need water. Every fiber of your being is longing for one thing, and that's water. And it's only in the desert when there's actually desperation that you begin to feel that, because guess what? Water is everywhere. You have clean drinking water in abundance. It's free at the water fountains outside. You can get it pretty much wherever you want. And so we don't recognize the fact that our very lives are dependent on water. Now, with God, it's very similar, because the next breath that we take is dependent on God and His provision. And yet, because we're going to take our next breath, or at least we're fairly confident we will, we don't really fully understand how dependent we are on God for every single moment of every single day. Not to mention the fact that we come and gather in church. We have endless amounts of Bible studies and worship services, and it's in abundance. So we fail to realize that we're actually desperate for God. So downpour is an attempt to remind ourselves together as a church that we're desperate for a movement of God. It's downpour, desperate prayer for a movement of God, because we want to come together in focused, passionate corporate prayer and ask God to do what only He can do. And so a few different things. 2 weeks from today, there's going to be a sermon series that will start called Downpour, where we're going to talk about prayer and how important it is and how to do it. And then on Wednesday nights, starting September 14th for the entire fall, we'll come together on Wednesday nights to pray, and it's going to be amazing. So mark your calendars for that. Don't miss it. It starts in September. Okay, so we are continuing our series today called Every Good Endeavor. This is about work, and we've seen in the last 2 weeks a kind of a theology of work, what we're to believe about work, what the Bible teaches about it. And here's what we've seen. We've seen that work can be a real problem, and that's because of sin. We saw that work, because of the fall of man, because sin has entered the equation, work can become hard. It can become frustrating. It can become pointless. It can lead us to selfishness. It can actually lead us to make an idol out of our work. So that was week 1. And then week 2, we looked at, even in the midst of all that problem, all that pain, God actually has a purpose in our work, and the purpose for work is that we would, number 1, we'd meet our needs. Number 2, that we can actually use our gifts and talents for God's glory, and that we can discover our divine calling, our vocation. The word vocation, the root word of that is voca. The Latin word is vocar. It actually means call, or to call. And so when we discover our vocation, our calling, we're discovering what God has us to do. And we talked about wherever we find ourselves, we can do that in light of God's calling. So that's where we've been in this series, and we've really seen that the Bible is all about work. We're designed to work. Now, here's what this has led to, because one of the effects of the fall of man is that we have a distorted view of work. So here's what is a very common way of thinking in our culture. If I'm not accomplishing something, then I'm wasting time. Can anybody relate to this? Okay, a few of us. If I'm not, so work is a good thing. We can find purpose in our work. It can be challenging, but we need to do it anyway. So we come up with this. If I'm not accomplishing something at every point in time all day long, then I'm wasting my time. And this is something that kind of plagues a lot of us. Or here's another way to look at it. Success equals busyness. So you've had this conversation with someone. This is how the conversation has gone. Someone has come up to you and they've said, hey, I want to ask you a favor. Now, I know you're really, really busy. I know that you are so slammed, but please do this for me. And when you hear that, you say, yes, I am busy, right? Because busyness equals success. So the last thing you would want them to think is that you're not busy, right? Because if you came across not busy, then you must be wasting your time, or you must be lazy, or you must not be ingenuitive. It's a combination of two words. But you must be lacking something, right? If success equals busyness and somebody wants to think you're busy, so you want to appear busy, I want to appear busy, and at the end of the day, we just think as long as I'm doing a lot of things, then I'm successful, I'm important, people need me. I'm so busy that I can't even stop to do someone else a favor or spend time with someone. So, and it's not just you and me. Here's how this kind of translates into our work. Because busyness is all of life, and we are very busy people, but busyness translates into all of our work. So this is from Business Insider. 64% of Americans canceled vacations last year. Okay, 1/3 did it for work-related reasons, even though most felt they were more in need of a vacation than the year before. So a couple weeks ago, we saw that 54% or 50% of vacation is left on the table anyway. We don't take it. But then 64% of people cancel their vacations anyway after they've started, much of those for work-related issues. So we cannot get away from work. So we're busy with work. Success equals busyness. If I'm not accomplishing something, then I'm wasting time. We'll take it a step further. So even if you do get the vacation, 25% of people checked into work hourly while on vacation. Hourly checking into work via email and phone. 59% said they check work during traditional holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving. Basically, work is everywhere. So this means that even when we get away, all we're doing is we're taking our work from the office to the beach. And instead of enjoying what's in front of us, we're sitting there like this, and we're like this, and we're like this, because we can't disconnect. We check into work hourly. Some of you are saying, I check into work minutely. Because I'm just that committed, right? I cannot break away. Success equals busyness. Now, what would God have to say about this issue? Does the Bible speak to this issue at all? Because here's what we know. We know that hard work is a good thing. We know that being committed to our work is good. We know that God designed us to accomplish things. So does God have anything to say when it becomes lopsided? Well, I'm going to argue that he does, and here's what I think we're going to see today. God built in a pattern of rest in his design for work. God actually built in a pattern of rest and work that's actually so much a part of his design for work that if you miss it, then you actually miss a very important part of his design for work. So if you walk out of, looking at what the Bible has to say about work, only walking away with, you need to work, then you've missed something very, very important. And that's the idea of rest. I want to show you from Scripture where we see this. If you have a Bible, you can turn to Genesis chapter 2. Super easy to find. It's the very first page of your Bible. That's Genesis. So Genesis chapter 2. And then if you feel so inclined and you want to get ahead, you can find Exodus. That's the next book, second book of the Bible, Exodus chapter 20. So we're going to be in both places today. So we've looked a lot in this series in Genesis, and we've seen how God has created everything, and he created it, and it was good, and then he put people to work. We saw that week 2. It went badly because of the consequences of sin. We saw that week 1. But in the creation account where God's speaking of the work he did, he actually demonstrates this pattern of rest that he's going to lay out for us. So Genesis chapter 2, let's start in verse 1. Here's what it says. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So verse 3, so God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So we see this kind of pattern of working, finishing the work, resting. Working, finishing the work, resting. So God, here's a couple things to understand. God did not need restorative rest. In other words, God doesn't have a finite amount of energy like you and me. It's not like God said, oh, I'm so tired of been working 6 days straight. It's a big world. It took a lot of work to create it. I need to rest, okay? To recharge my batteries. God is not saying that, okay? But why would he do it if he doesn't need restorative rest? I think God is modeling here for us something very important that's woven into the fabric of how we are made, that we need rest. And so God models it in creation. So it's part of the grand story of how all things came to be, that there's work and there's rest. And he feels so strongly about this that in Exodus chapter 20, you can go ahead and flip over to that. Exodus chapter 20, we find the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are given to the people of Israel as they're moving out of bondage and into the promised land. It's like God gives Moses, here's some main things to remember, some guidelines, some rules, some laws. And of the 10 Commandments, if you're familiar with the 10 Commandments, this particular commandment that we're going to read today is not one that you have ever felt badly for breaking. Right? If you've ever lied, you probably felt bad. If you've ever stolen something, you felt bad. If you've ever coveted what someone else has, maybe you felt bad about that. But no one has ever laid in bed at night and thought, oh, I broke the commandment to take a day off. Okay? No one feels bad. But here's the thing. It's so woven into how we do life that it's a very important principle to understand. So let's read Exodus chapter 20. This is one of the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath, starting in verse 8, Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So God brings them through this whole thing about this day they need to take off. And he references the creation account. He says, remember, this is what God did in the creation account. He rested on the seventh day. So you do the same. And this is the command. Thou shalt take a day off. That's a pretty good commandment, right? I mean, so many of us are like, well, no, we want to work. No, take a day off. No, God, but we want to work all day. No, take a day off. Thou shalt take a day off. So they would have received this commandment a lot the same way that you and I would, okay? So a couple of things to remember about this commandment. The first thing is, this is the only one of the 10 commandments that's not explicitly repeated in the New Testament. All the other commandments are explicitly repeated and commanded kind of again. This commandment is referred to, Hebrews 4 talks about entering a spiritual rest. There's different, Jesus talks about the Sabbath, but it's never explicitly repeated as a command in the New Testament. But there is an important principle related here to the balance of work and rest that we need to understand. The word Sabbath, okay, that's used in Exodus 20 is actually a verb that they make into a noun. So the verb is rest, okay, the action of rest. Do rest or don't work. That's Sabbath. So what they do is they take that verb and they make it into a noun. Let's take a whole day and make it the don't work day, the rest day. And so that's where we get the idea of Sabbath. So this command was the balance of work. So if work is good, it's part of God's design. This is the other side of work. That if it's missing, then your work is not going to be as effective. It's about seeking rest and it's about trusting in God. So here's the thing that we have to understand about the people of Israel. They would have received this information, this thou shalt take a day off. They would have received this exactly like I think you probably received it. Here's the thing. They were a 24/7 culture. They were working for the Egyptians. They were kind of at their whim. So they took care of themselves when they could, but the majority of their time was spent just making the Egyptians happy with them. Not to mention the fact that there was no refrigeration, there was no way to keep food, so if you didn't work on a particular day, you didn't eat. So when they saw this, they thought, okay, which day do we not want to eat? Which day do we not want our needs met? That's how they would have received this. So they would have said, take a day off? No way. I can't do that in my situation. Sound familiar? Many of us are thinking, well, how am I going to do this? What does it look like for me to actually disconnect? I would be, by the way, the only one. Everybody would think I was lazy. I may not advance as quickly as everybody else does. I would be perceived as not committed to the company or to the firm or to whatever context that I'm in. So we look at this and we say, yeah, I get that this is a principle and maybe this is good for someone else, but I can't do this. And here's what I would encourage you to do. Take just a moment and consider that maybe God has designed this for you, and maybe there's ways that you can apply this to your life. Maybe you got to be creative about it. But this is a gift. In fact, Jesus one time was asked about the Sabbath day. And the way he replied is he said, look, man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man. What does that mean? Well, it means that we aren't subject to rest. Rest is subject to us. It's a gift. It's a gift that's for us. And so as we walk through this today, I want you to understand and I want you to kind of think about, what does it look like if this gift was for me? And how could I, in my context, maybe push some boundaries, maybe do things that no one is doing so I can get a better result? How can this be for me? So before we move on, I just want to say there are different ways to view Sabbath, okay? There's debates on which day. Is it Saturday or is it Sunday? It used to be Saturday, then it was Sunday. What does work mean? Okay, when he says don't do work, what constitutes work? Is it still binding because it's not repeated in the New Testament? I'm going to answer none of those questions today. How about that? Maybe at some point in the future, we'll do a more in-depth study on the 10 Commandments. I think that would be amazing if we did that, and we'll go into all that. But just know there's good and godly people on both sides of this. It's not an essential doctrine. It's one of those that we can disagree. But I want to look more at the principle of rest and balance as it relates to work. What is the principle here? If this is something that God felt like it was so important to command it of his people and put it in the design of work and rest, what is in it for us? So the first question I want to ask is this: why? Why should we intentionally rest from work? Okay, why is this for you? The first reason is we reflect the image of God by mirroring his example of work and rest. That in creation, God set this into motion. He created this pattern of you work and you rest. You work and you rest. And those of us, we are all made in his image. One of the ways that we can reflect his image is we can model that same pattern of working and resting, working and resting. If all we do is rest, then we miss out on the work. If all we do is work, then we miss out on the rest. God did both. And for those of us who are followers of Christ, and I know not all of us are, and we'd love for you to become one, and I hope that we can help you explore faith in Jesus and what that means. But for those of us who are followers of Christ, this is a way for us to actually model the image of God to other people. That God worked and he rested. He worked and he rested. And we do the same way. It's a way to reflect God's image. God commands this of us, but he wants this for us. So this was a command to his people, but it was more for them. It's part of his design for humanity. Work, rest. The second reason is that rest demonstrates our trust in God as our provider. So the people would have been saying, take a day off, no way. If I stop working, then who's going to fill in the gap? If I go 6 days and there's another day left in the week and I'm not providing for myself, who's going to make that up? And God's saying, trust me. I will. Trust me. There's another story with the same group of people of Israel. They needed food. And so God provided manna, bread from heaven that was on the ground. And he told them, hey, enjoy the bread, but don't store it for the next day. Trust me that I'm going to provide. So they said, okay, great. Thanks for the bread. We kind of believe you, but, just to be safe, we're going to store some bread. What happened? Well, the bread rotted, right? The next day they wake up and all the bread that they had stored from the previous day, rotten. The principle there is God is saying, if you're my people, and if you trust me, then stop working. Let me fill in the gap. Trust me. This is why in Psalm, the psalmist is able to say this in Psalm 4, in peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. There's a principle here of trust that God wants us to be dependent on him, that there's a point where I can stop my W-2 work And I can not do that for a day, and God will still let me dwell in safety. That if I'm committed, if I've worked those 6 days to provide for my family, to meet my needs, to find my purpose, to do all those things that work is designed to do, and then if I stop, I'm demonstrating to myself and other people, I trust that God will continue to provide where I have stopped. So in your context, maybe this is the reason why you need to do this. Maybe this is the reason why you need to demonstrate to your family that they're more important to you than pleasing your boss or your colleagues or your coworkers. Maybe you need to demonstrate to God that I trust you. Like if you built this into the design, I'm willing to trust. And maybe that means that I won't advance as quickly. Maybe that means that someone will judge me. Or, get this, maybe it means that I'll change the culture of my office. And other people will start to take a day off as well and disconnect and not be so tied to work 24/7, 365. I Googled how to disconnect from work while on your day off, and it brings up article after article after article after article of people that are attempting to fix this problem of constant connection. So what if you led the way and you said, I'm doing this for different reasons, but here's the thing, I'm going to disconnect and God's going to fill in the gap. So the third reason is that we remember the work Jesus did and we cease our own. Here in just a few minutes, we're going to take communion, and this is a way that we remember what God did for us, that he sent his son, Jesus, to die in our place for our sins, and when we put our trust in him, we can have life. And so part of rest is to say, I'm demonstrating, I'm reminding myself that this is not about me, this is not about my performance, this is about Jesus and what he's done. And so rest is a way to say, you know what? God has this. I can cease my striving, and I can let God fill in the gap. And then finally, the reason why is to connect with God and our families and friends more intentionally. There's a pastor who has this saying that I really like. He says this: don't give up what's unique to you for something someone else will do. Don't give up what's unique to you for something someone else will do. What's unique to you? Well, here's what's unique to me. I am the only first husband that my wife will ever have. Okay? Hopefully the only one, but I'm the only husband she's going to have. I'm the only dad that Olive and Isla have in this world. Someone else could step in and do it for me, but I'm the only dad that they have. I am not the only minister that will ever be at this church. Someone else will eventually pastor in different ways here, and we'll all be gone and other people will take over. That's the way it goes. So I'm not going to give up something that's unique to me for something someone else will do. Here's what's unique to you: the relationships in your life. Your sons, your daughters, your moms, your dads, your siblings, your spouse. That's what's unique to you. No one can step in and do that for you, or if they have to, they will, but then you miss out on what was originally supposed to be yours. So here's the point. Someone else will eventually work at your company. Someone else will eventually sit in your office. Someone else will eventually fly your plane. Someone else will eventually teach your class. Someone else will eventually make the drinks at Starbucks that you make. Someone else will eventually do everything we do, but no one else can replace you in the relationships in your life. And if they have to, it's because you have chosen to step out and let something step in. And so often what that is work. And so what your relationships around you, what they see is, yeah, dad's here, but he's in a corner on his computer. Yeah, dad's here, but he's constantly on his phone and he's glued to it. It's, yep, sorry, I'm busy, just 1 second. And so you're there, but you're not there. And what someone will eventually do, you've given that higher priority than your family. And I think there's a principle here that if we want to connect with God and our families and friends more intentionally, then we have to decide that there are days, there are times, there are seasons when what someone else will eventually do takes a back seat, and the one thing that is ours to do has to come to the front. So I hope you see that there's lots of reasons why you and I would do well to make a practice of rest in this balance. But here's the question that I know that you probably have. How? How? Because here's the thing. I know that there are challenges in every work environment. I know that in this area, we work more hours, harder, longer, bigger commutes, more stress, more time, more energy put into our work. I get that. But here's the thing. if it's important, and if God wove it into the way things are done, then maybe, let's consider that it's for us. So let me talk about a couple of ways that you might be able to put this into practice. For one thing, it's good to rethink what actually is rest for you. Maybe you work with your minds. Okay, this is a knowledge-based economy, and maybe you're right in the thick of that. You work with your mind. You're looking at spreadsheets. You're solving problems. You're designing things. You sit at a desk. So maybe for you, rest is actually to do something with your hands. It's to work in the yard. That's one of my favorite ways to rest. A lot of the work that I do never finishes. It never gets solved, right? There's always another sermon to write. There's always another meeting to have. There's always more people to serve. It never ends. And that's the design of it. So I can go home and I can work on my 12 by 14 foot yard and I can turn it into something amazing, right? And I can succeed at that. It's really a really great thing. So that's how I find rest. So maybe you find rest in gardening or working in the shop or doing something with your hands. If you work with your hands all day long, every day, well, then maybe rest for you looks like sitting down, and it looks like kicking your feet up, and it looks like taking a breather. So let's think about what actually makes us rest. The other thing to consider, and this is just my opinion, but this is what I've found. Set and communicate boundaries. Often you have way more control than you think you do if you just communicate, hey, this is what I need. I'm going to work really hard, but this is the day that I need. I'm going to work really hard, but when I go on vacation, this is what I'm going to check in, and I'm available if there's an emergency, but those kind of things. You set and communicate clear boundaries, plan out your time, and then disconnect. Disconnect. So I don't know exactly if any of those resonate with you, but here's what I know. If you want it badly enough, and if you begin to see that this is part of God's design, not just for humanity, but for you, then I think what will happen is we'll say, God, if this is what you want, if this is for me, then I'll make it happen. Some of you need to know that it's okay to rest. Some of you need to know that. If you're a stay-at-home parent, like my wife is, it can be very, very difficult for you to find rest in the midst of that. And maybe there's ways that the other spouse, your husband or your wife who works, can help you solve that problem and to alleviate some of that. But whether you work outside of the home or inside of the home, this is for you. So if we can together begin to do this, here's what I think will eventually happen. Psalm 46:10, the psalmist says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." He says, be still, stop, breathe, and know, be confident, be sure that He is God, that He provides, that you can trust in Him, and that when we stop, God's going to take us where we need to go. So I don't know what that looks like for you, but here's what I would hope. Here's my trust. For those of us who follow Jesus, this is just another way that we can say, Jesus, I'm going to trust you even though this is uncomfortable. I'm going to trust you even though I don't know where this is going to end up. Lead me, guide me, give me wisdom. That's our prayer this morning. Let's pray.